Tonight, Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds was set to give her annual condition of the State House address. But on her way to the House chamber in the Iowa State House, she had to walk past a few hundred protesters. And you can hear the protesters there. Some of them jeered the governor as she walked by, but more had focused their chants and signs to criticize the violent methods used by federal ICE agents as the Trump administration rounds up people living in the country illegally. Afterwards, as Iowa Capitol Bureau reporter Isabella Warren shows us, the governor laid out her priorities for the year.
Before her address, Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds honored the 2 Iowa National Guard members that were killed in Syria in 2025.
We don't pause simply to mourn, but to celebrate their lives and give thanks for the gift they've given all us.
The family of one of those soldiers, Staff Sergeant Nate Howard, attended the speech and received an emotional standing ovation from those gathered in the Iowa House chamber. The governor stressed what may be her main priority for legislators: property tax reform. She proposed capping property tax increases for most homeowners at 2% per year, which she says will save homeowners $3 billion over 6 years. That also means that local communities would lose $3 billion to provide services. The governor wants to provide $10 million statewide to incentivize communities to share services with other towns to save money.
Spending is what drives taxes, always has, always will, and the most reliable way to protect taxpayers is to limit the growth of government itself.
The plan will also freeze up property taxes for homeowners 65 and older if their homes are valued at $350,000 or less.
Seniors who did everything right, who worked hard, paid their taxes and saved, are at risk of being taxed out of the very home they hope to grow old in.
She also pledged nearly $1/4 of new federal funding for rural health care to go toward cancer care. $50 million per year could fund cancer research, screenings, and treatment.
We're making early detection the norm, not the exception. Replacing fear with hope and making sure that if families hear the word cancer, they also hear, we caught it early and we can treat it.
Another thing she wants that she did not mention in her address is preventing those suspected of living in the U.S. illegally who have committed more than a simple misdemeanor of posting bail. At the Iowa State Capitol, I'm Isabella Warren.
Now, one of the top Democratic leaders in the Iowa House believes Governor Kim Reynolds didn't spend enough time in her speech explaining to Iowans how bad the state's budget situation is. Minority Whip Sean Bagnuski says the governor's budget plans will force the use of more than $1 billion from state reserves because she had Republicans are spending so much more than the state is taking in.
You know, we're looking at the overall amount. So how much do we have in reserves? How much do we have in the rainy day fund? Right now, we've got about $5 billion left. And if we're overspending by $1 billion every year, then you can do the math on when we run out.
Republican leaders have said that they expect state revenues and expenses to level out in the next few years.